In a lot of ways, I feel like this one is one of the most critical, most important lessons that entrepreneurs and millennials and Gen Z can learn in today's environment. And so these are my 5 tips for how to overcome the fear of public speaking. The very first lesson that I rolled out within the Toolbox was to find your voice. And once you find your voice and your ideas and your perspective, you want to be able to put that to good use. And at many points in your career, maybe throughout your entire career, you're going to have to share your ideas, defend, advocate, push for a project, a strategic approach, trying to sell something, trying to motivate, inspire, get people to buy into your ideas, your plan, your vision. And so public speaking can be in front of tens of people or it could be in front of thousands or more people. And so these tricks can all help people along the entire path. It's interesting that public speaking is the number one fear that people cite, more than death itself, more than snakes. For me, it's probably snakes and spiders are more scary than public speaking. But from the personality tests that I've done, I'm INTJ on Myers-Briggs. I'm certainly an introvert. And getting up in front of people, speaking out loud, it was very unnerving when I was first starting off in my career. So much so that when I first took my first job out of college, sitting in a cubicle and having to make phone calls to other people. And I was terrified to the thought of people around me sitting in other cubes, being able to listen in to what I was saying, judging me, seeing whether or not I was correct, sounding stupid, fumbling over words. It was a scary prospect for me. And so this idea of having to get in front of a group of people and have to present, that was a real fear that I had early in my career. And one of the things that I recognized was there was almost no other superpower more meaningful than to be able to capture an audience's attention and win them over and get them to buy in to your ideas, what you're trying to portray or sell. And if you can get them on your side, it's almost like magic. So this idea of being very good at public speaking was a goal of mine when I was starting out in my career, and I had to figure it out. And being an introvert, I didn't like things like Toastmasters necessarily. That's an idea that a lot of people get into as a safe entry point and dive into. And for me, it just wasn't the right path. So a few ideas that I have that I want to share with you about how to get started and overcome this fear over time. Over the last several years, I've probably spoken at 30 or 40 public events each year. And so I'm well into the hundreds now. But it took me 11 years into my career to get in front of a group of people and present. And a lot of people will say I'm a natural and an overnight sensation, quote unquote. There's never such a thing. That this is a long grind. There's a lot of work put into this. And it really did take me 11 years to get comfortable being in front of a group of other people. And so hopefully some of these tips can help you. So if you've found your voice and you've taken that first video and some of the lessons from there and figured out what you like presenting on, what you're passionate about, what your own unique ideas are, or they might be other people's ideas that you just want to share, you have some perspective. You have some point of view. And so that's the most important thing, is having something that you're passionate about and will allow you to know your material inside and out. Oftentimes that means that you have to create the presentation from scratch in order for you to know the material inside and out. And it can be difficult and challenging to present someone else's material. I know it is for me. If someone gives me a presentation in their script and the way that they would say something, a lot of times it won't necessarily jive with how I would sequence the order of information or even the points that I would cover. And so in order to be successful with the content, you may have to inject yourself into it. You may need to absorb yourself into the material and reconstruct it. And so that's the very first lesson, is know your material inside and out, so that it doesn't matter if you lose your place or you forget to mention something. The only person who knows is you, really, right? And so if you fumble back, or if you say you forgot something, if you show weakness, then the audience picks up on it. But if you just proceed and carry forward with confidence, that's number 2. Be confident in your projection and what you're sharing. The audience can't tell. They don't know what they don't know. They don't know if you skipped something or forgot something. And if you project in a confident manner, then that's half the battle right there. So you knowing the material inside and out with number 1 allows you to act confidently for number 2. The third idea here is to start small. This can be stupid small, right? It can be in front of a couple of people, to stand in front of a room. It could be 10 people or 20 people. For me, the threshold where I started to feel really nervous was about 50 people, especially when there are senior leaders in a room that you respect. And maybe they're amazing presenters in their own right. And so you feel like you have to live up to a certain level of expectation. But if you get number 1 and number 2 down, that helps you with number 3, and you build it up. You build up to, tens of people to 50 people. I remember the first time I presented in front of a room full of 50 people, I had to go to the restroom and take a breather and run my hands under cold water and splash some water in my face. And I did the presentation fine. It was just afterwards, my heart was racing and you feel like you have butterflies and a little bit of trouble breathing. And so the more you do that, the more exposure you have, then it becomes nothing. And you're like, 50 people, whatever, some people aren't even paying attention. The thing is, most people aren't paying attention. They're thinking about themselves. That's the funny thing. And you get bits and pieces of their attention. And so to really hold their attention throughout, you have to have some tricks to throw in to be different from other presenters. But a lot of the times people are just focused on themselves or daydreaming. And so don't worry about them as much. And then when you get to 50 people, 100 people, you just get in front of a room full of people where it's so big, it doesn't really matter, right? You may have to walk across a stage or even walk between tables in a room. I like to get up and walk around because it injects some energy into my presentation as well as inject some energy into the room itself. And so once you get up to 1,000 people, it's almost like it doesn't matter. You're just talking in front of a lot of people. And I remember the very first big conference that I spoke at, I submitted a proposal on an interesting topic to me, and they accepted it. And little beknownst to me, until I got the formal agenda, they had put me as the keynote to open up the conference, which was like, that was completely shocking because that was the first big conference that I ever did, and they put me as a keynote instead of a breakout. And then when I showed up, I was like, how many people are going to be in the room? And they're like, 1,000. I'm like, okay, well, there's not really anything to worry about now. I'm already here. I know my material inside and out. I can project confidence. And so we've already presented this, or I've already presented this in front of small groups of people. Now it's time to get up to 1,000. So get comfortable with size. And as you work your way up, that can become easier and easier. So earlier I mentioned there are some tricks to hold an audience's attention. And there are some basic ones. So we're on our 4th point now. Some basic ones like using a formula for your presentation. Simple things like an obvious beginning, middle, and end, or tell people up front the 3 things you're going to tell them, then tell them those 3 things, and then recap by telling them what you've told them, right? There are some very basic, straightforward ones like that. I like using lists of 10, and I'll tell people, here are the 10 things we're going to cover, or I'm going to go one by one from 1 to 10. And so they know how long they are, how far they are into a presentation, they know how much longer they have to sit and listen to you. And it makes it feel like they're making progress. They know where you're going. in terms of your overall structure that you're presenting. Oftentimes I'll present a roadmap, like here are all the various pieces that we're going to be talking about so that they can get a sense of the direction of the conversation as well. Some other tricks are to use humor, right? Humor works really well, or to use props. I like using props or examples in real life that, day-to-day life as humans, as parts of the society or as consumers buying things in this world, when you can relate things down to a very stupid level that's relatable for people, like they don't have to jump through hoops to try and understand or connect the dots. They're like, oh yeah, I've done that in my life. I've seen that. I've gone through that same thing. And then you tie it to some other parallel idea that's really your main point. Then they're like, okay, I get it. Chris broke it down in a way that makes this understandable for me. So creating a formula for the way that you present your ideas can be really helpful. And then the last idea is to break up all of your material into little stories, little 5-minute stories that you know inside and out. And for me, I break down my slides to every single point that I'm going to make. And so I don't have to remember all the points. I just look at the slide and I'm like, okay, that helps me trigger the recall for the important point that I want to get to. And then we get to the next one. And so I may have, for a 60-minute presentation, I might cover 120 slides. And that breaks down to 30 seconds per slide. Some slides I may cover for 5 seconds. Other slides may cover for a minute. But on average, it might be 20 to 30 seconds. And that helps with the feeling of progress and movement. And it's a little cheat that I have so that I don't have to remember the entire script necessarily. The slides help guide and trigger which point I want to make for me. The other advantage of having so much material is it helps the audience feel like you're making progress. So I will have presentations of an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours long. And then afterwards, people will come back and say, wow, it's amazing that you went through 200 slides. It didn't feel like 2 hours, right? The time just flew by because they felt like they were making progress, advancing through. Instead of some of these presentations that you sit through and people will sit on a slide for 10 minutes and it may be interesting content, but visually it's boring, right? It doesn't give you enough to look at. So those are my 5 tips for you to think about, whether it's starting small, knowing your content inside and out, figuring out your voice and your passion and what you want to talk about and breaking that up into meaningful stories, figuring out what formula is right for you to have a beginning, middle, and end, or whether you use a list of 10 or a roadmap or things like that. Hopefully these are helpful ideas for you to overcome this number one fear that people in the world seem to have. Until next time, talk to you guys later.